The Conservatives say they don't want an election, but later today at Conservative Party election headquarters, Industry Minister Jim Prentice will launch a pre-campaign attack on Stéphane Dion's spending promises, saying it'll drive the country deeper into deficit. Mr. Prentice is with us here today. Mr. Prentice, before we talk about these spending promises, let's dig down a little so people will know what you're going to be unveiling later today. You calculate, according to the Conservatives, that the election spending promises, that the Liberals have 86 major spending commitments since January 2006, $62.5 billion in new debt over the next 4 years. Now, Mr. Prentice, in your booklet that you have here on the Liberal spending promises, you also say that there is another 33 uncommitted spending promises because you didn't have enough information on that. How do you weigh these Liberal spending promises with your own spending promises and the way that your government has been spending?
Well, of course, our government will produce a budget. That's what governments do, and it will be a prudent budget for uncertain economic times. But really, the purpose of the report that you have is to document the spending promises that the Liberals have been making over the last year, which would have the effect of plunging our country $62.5 billion further into debt. And it's time that the Liberals came clean with Canadians and explained how they would pay for these spending promises. Do they propose to run up our debt by $62 billion? Do they propose to increase taxes? It's time for them to explain themselves.
Well, Mr. Prentice, let's take a look at what you're going to be presenting at Tory election headquarters later today.
$625 million on climate change research.
I'm sure it's not conventional practice what I'm doing.
$2 billion of the general climate change program funding.
Offer to Canadians at the next election the best electoral platform they never saw.
$593 million from our wind-powered productive incentive.
The overall burden of taxes of Canadians, megatons of money.
Well, Mr. Prentice, that certainly looks like a Conservative attack ad ready to go on television when the writ is dropped. How gung-ho are you guys to have an election campaign?
Well, what you've seen is a montage of Mr. Dion making spending promises. We can hardly be faulted that it doesn't look like leadership. It looks like confusion. It looks like spending promises that are going to drive our country into debt. And that's not what we need in uncertain economic times.
But clearly you must be planning an election campaign here. This is unheard of when you see a government doing the election promises. You're driving here for an election. Are you not on the bus trying to drive an election here?
Well, our intent is to bring forward a budget that will be a sound budget that we hope will pass the House of Commons. But whether there's an election or not will really depend upon the Liberals in particular. And in that context, we think it's appropriate that we should force them to account to Canadians, document and inventory all of the spending promises that they've made, which are enormous, totaling $98 billion. These spending promises have to be paid for. Canadians understand that, and Canadians deserve to know how they're going to pay for these commitments.
Well, let me ask you a specific promise that Mr. Dion made. $3 billion for infrastructure, which he made last week. You know, we're losing a lot of manufacturing jobs in this country, and infrastructure jobs are a good way to put people to work, as you well know. But automotive and Kitchener, 1,200 jobs. We're losing something like 200 jobs a day in the manufacturing sector. What's wrong with spending money on infrastructure? What's wrong with a promise like that?
Well, of course, we are spending money on infrastructure. We're in the midst of a $33 billion infrastructure build that's the largest since the Second World War, over 7 years. But the point of the analysis is really to inventory 86 spending promises that the Liberals have made over the course of the last year. Now, Canadians understand this. You can't spend money that you don't have. The effect of this is to essentially to mortgage our future, and most Canadians have a house or aspire to own a home, and they know that the effect of spending money you don't have is to drive up your debt, to reduce your flexibility, to reduce your standard of living. And it's time that the Liberals accounted for how they're going to pay for all of these spending promises.
But how about putting the shoe on the other foot here? How about what are you guys going to do about our manufacturing sector where we're losing 200 jobs a day? And you know this is a serious problem. In fact, you seem to have had your own dispute with your own finance minister because you wanted Ontario's automotive industry to be able to dip into this $1 billion economic hardship fund, and the finance minister said, no, you couldn't do that.
Well, all of the expenditures that we brought forward exist within a sound fiscal framework of a balanced budget, and the community trust is being brought forward. Will require negotiation with the provinces, and it will help the manufacturing sector and the forest sector. And of course, this is a concern that I've been involved with as the Minister of Industry. But the real point of the analysis that's being done is to inventory the excessive promises that have been made by the Liberals and to say, how are these going to be paid for? Because Canadians are entitled to know if their taxes are going to be increased or if the country is going to be plunged into a deficit.
But in fairness, Canadians also have to know what you're going to be able to do for Ontario and Quebec's manufacturing sector, which is suffering. So it's fair enough to put the question to you. You're sort of dancing away from that. What are you going to do about that?
Well, the Community Trust is the initiative that we put forward, and there will be a budget. As I say, this is what governments do. We will bring forward a prudent budget. We'll deal with these issues, but it will be a sound budget for uncertain economic times because we face an American slowdown. And we need to have our finances in order. We need to maintain sound fiscal finances in Canada. We have that. We've made a lot of progress in the last 2 years. What the country can't afford to do is what Mr. Dion is proposing, which is to spend in excess of $98 billion on unfunded promises that don't exist in the fiscal framework of Canada and which are going to drive our country into a deficit.
Well, let me ask you another issue. That's they've got $5 billion for poverty, and they say they can eliminate child poverty in this country with that $5 billion over I think it's over a 5-year period of time. But we don't hear anything from the Conservatives about what they would do for child poverty. What would the Conservatives do about child poverty?
Well, we've brought in the universal child care benefit, and Mr. Dion proposes to take that away. That, in and of itself, that decision by Mr. Dion would drive families into poverty. So that's the essence of the plan that they're bringing forward. But really, what we're focused on today is, in aggregate, all of the spending promises that the Liberals have been making. The extraordinary size of these, the impact that it's going to have in uncertain economic times, and the fact that they are proposing, really, to drive this country into deficit, $62.5 billion. That's not what we hear Canadians want.
Well, you're certainly keeping the message, Mr. Prentice. I have one little quick question for you. Any poison pills that are going to be in the budget that would really force the Liberals to defeat the government?
Well, it'll be a sound budget. It will be a prudent budget. It'll deal with the realities that we face economically. It'll deal with our responsibility to maintain sound fiscal finances. And we don't aspire to have an election. We aspire to run the country, to govern, and to continue to do what we promised Canadians we would do. It's up to the Liberals if they want to have an election and take this kind of spending commitments to the people.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Prentice, although it certainly sounds like you guys want the election campaign. Coming up, Jane will talk to Liberal finance critic John McCallum, who will answer Minister Prentice's criticism. But before we go to break, some shots of Kosovo, which is expected to declare independence today.